activists in the Jewish community are calling on ABC to fire comedian and host Whoopi Goldberg from The View after, for a second time in just a year, she's made controversial statements with regards to the Holocaust in the Jewish community and what were the root causes of the deaths of nearly 6 million Jews at the hands of Nazi Germany. In a statement with the UK paper, the Sunday Times, Goldberg tried to explain away her previous comments by saying, and I quote, I'm going to read this, "It doesn't change the fact that you could not tell a Jew on the street. You could find me. You couldn't find them. That was the point I was making. You would have thought I had taken a big old stinking dump on the table, but now," Goldberg continued. Goldberg also claimed that Nazis targeted people of African descent and Jews because they were physically different. She also suggested that Jews had an easier time blending in with white people and hiding from the Nazis than black people did at the time of the Holocaust. Now, of course, Whoopi Goldberg was suspended from The View earlier this year for her comments about the Holocaust. Joining me now is Jewish and Black American community leader Marie Fisher, the director of the community outreach at Harut in Summerfield, Florida. Marie, how are you doing this evening?
Oh, good. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much. You know, I've got a few Black Jewish friends, but it's always good to hear directly from you because you do so much work in the community. Can you talk about why there's so much outrage over Goldberg's comments about the Holocaust?
Well, first of all, I think the first outrage comes from, she said practically the same statement a year ago. She turned around and apologized, and everybody took it as that she was sincerely apologizing. And then she said almost the exact same statement again. It's like almost she doubled down. So you can see where the outrage comes from, because we've also had other people, different races, different nationalities, who've said things and they've doubled down. You know, they've made like they've apologized. They haven't really apologized. So that's part of the reason. Part two is for her to say that it was, you know, whites going against whites, that Jews didn't look any different. And to say that that's, you know, you're basically saying all Jews are white. And I've learned just from growing from my years that that's far from it. I mean, in Europe, Jews did maybe look like they're Germans, but a lot of them did not. So for her to say that it was white and white, they couldn't tell, Germans didn't care. The Germans went in, they went through records, they would look through records of churches to see who was, who wasn't. This wasn't they were looking for people on the street. They actually went and did research and finding out who was Jewish and who wasn't. I mean, come on, they even went back as if your grandfather was Jewish.
You know, it's interesting because if you do a deep dive into kind of the causes of the Holocaust, the rise of the Nazi Party in the early 1930s, a big part of it goes towards that socioeconomic depression that Germany went into after World War I. And then the Nazi Party rose to power, as many fascist movements do, by blaming the outsider, by blaming the Jews. They convinced the German populace that, well, the reason you don't have money is because of the international Jewish community. The reason you don't have food is because the Jewish community is stealing all the food and hoarding it for themselves. The reason that Germany is not as great as it was under Otto von Bismarck was this sudden influx of Jewish people. And this is how you got the populace on board with it. Can you talk a little bit about the dangers of people minimizing the Holocaust in modern America, particularly when you have had so many anti-Semitic events happening in the last couple of years?
Because you're going to see history repeat itself. Like it says, if you don't study history, you are bound to repeat it. And when people start pointing to outsiders, it doesn't matter if you're Jewish, it doesn't matter who you are. If you look in history, when one group points to another group saying, you know, you don't have A, B, C, and D because this outside group, that leads to problems. We saw it with, you know, one thing people don't talk about, and Jews and Armenians talk about, the Armenian Holocaust that occurred in the 1920s. That was also very similar, where people were accused, you know, because they're outsiders, and it could happen again. It happens over and over. You saw it happen in Africa with the Tutsis. I can't remember the other group, but again, they pointed out, oh, because they're different, they're outsiders, we need to get rid of them. It's dangerous in the society. It's always been dangerous. And for people to blame the Jews, you know, they say the Jews with the blame for the Holocaust because they were outsiders. If people look deep into Nazi history and what Nazis were about, they were against a moral society. And a lot of people say the main reason why they, you know, aimed for the Jews is because they felt the Jews were the source of morality. For if it wasn't for Judaism, if it wasn't for Torah, you wouldn't have Christianity, you wouldn't have Islam, You wouldn't have the Judeo-Christian, I'll say even as Islam, Judeo-Christian Islam ethics that you have throughout the world, which actually make up a lot of the laws and rules of most Western societies.
Why do you think even until this day, when we have supercomputers in our hand, where you can look up any piece of information that has pretty much ever existed in the history of the world, we still have this level of ignorance when it comes to the historical nature of the Jewish community, and we still have this level of scapegoating and otherism and otherizing of the Jewish community that we've seen recently?
Because it's too easy for anybody to be told what they should know instead of people actually bothering and researching. And that goes for any group. I mean, even as, I'm Black and I'm Jewish, there are a lot of things that went on in Black history that a lot of Blacks don't know about themselves, or whites don't know about Black history. Same for Jewish history, because people aren't willing to research. A good example, like Whoopi says, oh, it was about whites. One thing when I went through my research, I looked there and saw where Ethiopian Jews during World War II were also subjugated to a Holocaust. The Italians, who were the Nazis, their allies, were trying to get rid of the Jews in Ethiopia. They survived, they got through it, and they even tried to get their leader, their Emperor Selassie, to have the European Jews come to Ethiopia to save them. So that was information that I never knew just by going through and researching.
Can you talk a little bit about what should happen to someone like Whoopi Goldberg? Because clearly there seems to be a cycle and a pattern. Do you think this is something where she should be suspended again? Should she be terminated? And if this was, let's say, a conservative voice saying this as opposed to Whoopi Goldberg, who's very active in the progressive community, do you think the punishment would have been the same?
I'm not sure. Because first of all, I'm not one for cancel culture. But I really think there needs to be more education. You know what, if you don't want to fire her, then you know what, bring more education on The View. Bring more people on who can refute her, who can show her, hey, A, B, C, and D, this is history. These are the facts, not what your opinion is. And, debate her. Have someone who can truly debate her and let people see how flawed her statements are.
Now, there's always been this, or historically been a fair amount of tension between African-American communities and Jewish communities. Most recently, we've seen Kanye and kind of blaming Jewish people for everything that has happened negative to him, everything from losing his wife and his family to losing sneaker deals, etc. What can we do to start bridging that gap and having more communication so that we don't have this racial scapegoating? Because at the end of the day, the same people who dislike the Jews are you the same people who dislike Black people. So it seems like we should try to get on the same side of things.
We should. I mean, you look through history, the two things that kept both Blacks and Jews strong over all the centuries was family and education. I remember when I was growing up, my parents pushed family and education, and now I'm in a Jewish community, it's family and education. Those are the two things that do work for both communities. And as long as those go away, you have problems. But as Blacks and Jews, there are lots of organizations out there that are working towards. I work for an organization called Harut, and that's one of the things we work on. We work on for Blacks and Jews everywhere to work together, especially working towards Israel. There's also another great organization called the Institute for Black Solidarity for Israel. They also work together with Black churches and bringing Blacks and Jews together. There are groups out there who are trying, but unfortunately you don't hear those. You hear about, the Kanye, the Kyrie, the Whoopi Goldberg. Those are the ones that are making the biggest noise because that's what the media is pushing. But in reality, there's still Blacks and Jews who are working together, that still respect each other, that work in hand. I mean, if you look at a lot of, especially the Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods, you will find them in Black communities. And some people wonder why. Because a lot of times when segregation was occurring back, or segregation of white flight, a lot of Orthodox leaders stayed put. In fact, even the Lubavitcher Rebbe told people to stay put in Crown Heights. Yes, it led to clashes and some issues, but overall, you look at Crown Heights now, and it's a growing, flourishing community with both Blacks and Jews together.
And finally, I do want to get your take on kind of the case of the week with George Santos, claiming that his grandmother fled the Holocaust and was a victim, claiming that his mother was Jew. He said Jew apostrophe-ish, as in kind of Jew, but not really Jewish or a practicing Jew. And those have all seemed to be lies. What do you think should happen with George Santos?
Well, he's already been elected, and there's nothing in the Constitution saying he has to resign but I think just let his actions speak for himself. Yes, he lied. He lied to get into office. What politician hasn't? Let him prove himself. If he's not worth being a congressman in 2 years, people will vote him out. But if he's worth his weight in gold, despite all his lies, even though I don't like that, I don't like for people to lie to get in office. But if he does right by his constituents, let them decide in the end.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for helping us to start bridging this gap between the Black community and the Jewish community. Because if you look at the civil rights movement, a lot of those people who got killed during the Freedom Rise and in Mississippi and the backwoods of Alabama, etc., were Jewish activists from the North who were coming down to help fight for civil rights here in the South. But we're going to go to our panel, continue this discussion on what Whoopi Goldberg said, and should she be suspended? Should she be fired? Should she have to make another on-screen apology? And we'll go to you, Rebecca. Just kind of legally, what should happen to Whoopi Goldberg? There's nothing in her contract saying she can't say things about the Holocaust, but would ABC have a leg to stand on if they wanted to terminate her with cause for doing so?
Well, I think something that we have to acknowledge here is even the language with how we talk about the Holocaust has changed a lot over the last 30 years. When we were listening to the previous guest, I was thinking about the first time when I visited the Holocaust Museum in the late 90s, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum that's located in Washington, D.C. And if I remember correctly from that school trip, we were told about the upwards, I think, 20 million people who died at the hands of the Nazis. And so what's interesting, when I just pulled up the actual definition of the Holocaust from the Holocaust Museum, is that it specifically talks about the systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million European Jews by the Nazi German regime and its allies and collaborators. And so one thing that I have noticed when I look at the language that a lot of Holocaust museums around the United States uses, it does center and talk about the 6 million European Jews. And that is different language than the language that we heard in the 90s, where there was references to the other millions of people who also died during that what is now called the Holocaust period between 1933 and 1945. So I think one thing that we do have to acknowledge is that language around with how we talk about the Holocaust has changed. The language in which with how we talk about race, like, for example, the previous guest talked about Blacks and Jews. We know that Jewish people can be Black. We know Jewish people can be white, can be of European descent. So even when we use those words, sometimes we use those words to distinguish the two groups when sometimes there's overlap. There are Black folks who are Jewish. So I think we do have to take a step back. We actually have to hear people out and understand what it is that they're trying to communicate. And we have to acknowledge that language has changed around us in the last 30 years. And once again, what your previous guest said, I think is very important, is we have to spend the time to educate ourselves, but also to educate our society on how we even talk about this and how we talk about the Holocaust, because the language is simply different than what it was, like I said, when I took my school trip in high school.
Dr. Carr, I think that we have to acknowledge and pay homage to the Holocaust of the European Jews, of course, but I think that it needs to be part of a broader conversation. I'd love to also put much emphasis on the Holocaust of King Leopold in the Congo, or the Armenian genocide, as was mentioned during the World War I, where the Ottoman Empire, now Turkey, literally displaced something like 20 million Armenians to the middle of the desert and let them starve to death. In addition to ensuring that we are properly acknowledging the Holocaust of European Jews, what can be done to put a context around this when we're talking about larger issues of genocide globally and what may be owed thereafter by those governments that committed those acts?
Well, Robert, I think it's going to take good faith, and it's going to take courage, and it's going to take, as Rebecca said, some education, some study. There's a lot to untangle with our previous guests. First of all, let's just say we should be against oppression in all its forms. And that's something that certainly, Lucretia, you've been saying all night. We got to stand against those who do harm to any of us. That's number one. With that in mind, of course, Whoopi Goldberg should not be fired or suspended. Why? Because if we're going to be intelligent about this, and I'm setting aside now calls for her suspension from people like Jonathan Greenblatt at the Anti-Defamation League, because his job is to be a rapid response kind of muscle to immediately come out with this. We have to put this in a context, as you said. There weren't just Jews who were killed in Hitler's Germany. In fact, Hitler based, if you go and look at James Whitman's recent book, Hitler's American Model, many of the race laws that were put in place in Nazi Germany were put in place after studying what was done to the African people in this country. They sent people here to study that. But that having been said, the Roma, who people use a slur and call them the gypsies, were persecuted. Homosexuals were persecuted. And yes, black people in Germany, probably none more prominent than Ernest Everett Just, a scientist who won the Spingarn Medal for the NAACP, who narrowly avoided the concentration camps himself in Germany. If you read Firpo Carr's book, Firpo, Carr, same as mine, but no relation, Hitler's Black Victims, you find out that black people were there. So we have to deal with those things. But let's for a moment distinguish between that and what we're talking about now, because these are two distinct things going on. What we're talking about now, while we're on the show today, in Israel today, Bibi Netanyahu, back from the political dead, is now leading probably the most right-wing government in the history of Israel. Our sister who just came on and talked about black people and Jews, and then mentioned something called the Black Support Group for Israel. Well, and then she mentioned the Falasha Jews. Listen, the Italians under Mussolini were attacking the Ethiopians, including the Falasha, who are the original Jews. Now, I'm not talking about what Kyrie is talking about, because see, what happens is this stuff gets all mixed up. But understand that the Abrahamic faith traditions came out of Africa. They are Africa exports, and much of Judaism was borrowed from the ancient Egyptian. That having been said, those same Falasha Jews, whether it be Operation Moses, you remember those airlifts in the 80s and when they were having the problems in Ethiopia around famine, when they got to Israel, they were treated like the N-words. Some of the most racist acts in the history of the modern world have been committed in Israel by white people against the Palestinians, against Falasha or Beta Israel Jews of African descent, Ethiopians. This gets very complicated, but I'll end with this. When Whoopi Goldberg said, "We're probably not a race," she made the mistake of including herself as Jewish. And what rears its head in that moment is, I don't care. If you say anything, you are now going to enter the political minefield of contemporary politics as it relates to Israel, the state of Israel. It's a very different thing. And you can't be black and Jewish. Yes, technically you can, but when you say we're probably not a race, they heard you said white people, that Jews are not a race. I said we. No, we don't count. I can't hear you. Why? My politics in the contemporary moment is too loud and it's drowning us out. So it's going to take courage. It's going to take good faith. And I don't know that either of those things are in enough supply for us to have an intelligent conversation about this.
Dr. Carr, I want to stay with you on that point because I think that the Jewish community does a great job of, as you say, having a rapid response department. That the minute something happens, whether domestically or internationally, they are able to push that out into the media. They can have those things denounced. We saw in the Kanye situation, Rahm Emanuel's brother sent out one tweet and Kanye was broke a few minutes later. What has to happen in the black community for us to have that same sort of human anonymity when it comes to the same sorts of slights and the same sorts of questions when it comes to the black folks?
Well, Robert, I'll say this. We know that the black community is not a monolith. The Jewish community is not a monolith. In fact, I wouldn't even call them communities because we have to be very careful. I mean, Amari Stoudemire is Jewish, for that matter, and has lived in Israel. He's a basketball player. You understand what I'm saying? So, I mean, it becomes very broad. What I think it would take is, again, good faith and not immediately jumping to force a conversation in a way that will only result in violence or a violent reaction. What do I mean by that? Certainly no one, certainly not me, and I don't think anybody here would endorse Kanye West's kind of broad, kind of vitriolic diatribe. At the same time, we have to understand that the response to that simply backs the black community, so to speak, into a corner. because we can't have honest and open conversation. There's a very interesting book called by Mark Bollinger called Black Power, Jewish Politics. It's about how Jewish communities in the United States in the 1960s and 70s, looking at Black nationalist and Pan-African formation, took a lot of cues from how Black people were getting together. And this is when you see the rise and the kind of proliferation of something that existed before, but really begins to move in terms of Jewish day schools and these kind of pride organizations that came together. There's a lot of evidence of cooperation that goes beyond just the civil rights movement, although that is there, as you mentioned. But what it's going to take for us in terms of Black people, if we wanted a rapid response team like that, go back to the Garvey movement, who said, look at the Zionists and how they're dealing with Palestine. Black people need to do the same thing. Well, see, we can't do that. Why? Because it is in the interest of the United States foreign policy, as you know well, to support Israel in the way that it is supporting it. And that is bipartisan. You better not try to mess with that foreign aid money that goes to Israel. Well, if you're a Black American, particularly if you're one that anchors yourself completely around this American flag and doesn't look globally in terms of some form of solidarity between African people and other places, you can't model that. Why? There is no rapid response team for the American Negro as long as we are wrapping ourselves around that flag. Israel is able to influence the world the way it does, in part because there is a global solidarity around the concept. I'm not critiquing it. I'm not endorsing it. I'm just observing it. And I'm saying if we want something like that, it's going to take us going beyond these national boundaries and beginning to see each other in a form of solidarity. And we can take a lesson from Israel in that regard.
Absolutely. Lucretia, I want to get your thoughts on George Santos. While we brought it up, him claiming to have a Jewish grandmother who survived the Holocaust, apparently lying about everything. What do you think should happen to somebody like that who lies to get into office?
Welcome to United States politics. I'm sorry, Republicans and Democrats. Who's still lockstep and believe these people? They only need you and they only come and talk to you every 2 to 4 years. You still believe in them when our national debt is $32 trillion, when people every walk of life can't even put clothes on their backs or food on the table. And you think I care about what a politician got to say? What you got to say? How you going to survive for the next day? Because if we're waiting on them, I'm sorry, the government is not here to help you whatsoever. So like they said, you super smart, but all you got to do is pick up the book if you wants to read. But if you just want to continue listening to sound bites, then do it. I haven't watched television in 8 years, so I have no idea half the crap y'all talk about. I ain't got time for that no more. It's a bunch of crap. And I said it. So all of this stuff, would they get rid of Whoopi? No, that's their cash cow. That lady can say whatever she wants. She could come and attack me. She could call me out my name. She could say anything she wants about me because I believe in my nation, because I believe in my next door neighbor who happens to be a white man, because I believe in my mother and my ancestors, and I believe what this woman taught me. So it doesn't even matter. Me holding up this picture probably made a whole bunch of people twerk a little bit because they mad. At least I know my past. At least that school teacher she refused for me to be ignorant. At least my father made me read a book every week. And at least they said, if you want to be smart, pick up a book, because most people won't. At least you'll be 90% smarter than the next man. So for everyone to be super smart with a computer in their hand, turn off the TV, research for yourself, and digest and use your common sense. So I'm going to remember who my ancestors, who they truly was. That woman was a school teacher. I got a doctor. She was the last slave. So all these people that they say that we are exceptional. We're not exceptional. This is the norm in the Black community. So I don't know what to tell y'all. I don't know what television y'all are watching. I'm sorry, use my own logical mind. I'm not going to listen to what anybody else got to say. You put it on a piece of paper. Let me read it. Let me use my common sense, then get back at me. So I don't do this. I don't go and look at a fight video so I can get angry and hate the white man.
Well, Lucretia, we got to hit a quick break.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment.
When you talk about Blackness and what happens in Black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it.
This is about covering us.
Invest in Black-owned media.
Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks.
We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind $100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible.
Checks and money orders go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.